privileged. Not long before, a Japanese bomb attack on a water treatment plant had also hit the nearby diplomatic building. At 12:45 p.m., dots appeared in the sky, 36 of them. They swiftly grew larger and louder. From airfields in occupied China, the Japanese Navy could dispatch Type 96 land-attacking aircraft able to fly over 1,000 kilometers on a single fueling. The Japanese were almost invulnerable and could bomb the Chinese government in exile into submission. From inside the shelter, Jiang heard the noise of aircraft engines. First he made out the pitifully small number of Chinese Air Force fighters sent up to engage the enemy. Not long afterward, he heard the sound of bombs dropping, and then the booming response of Chinese anti-aircraft guns. The raid continued for a full hour before the all-clear finally sounded at 2:35 p.m. Jiang went out to see the damage. All across the city, from the docks to the residential districts, buildings were gutted, bombed into hollow wrecks. So complete was the destruction that the surviving buildings seemed to him strangest of all. At one junction, a cluster of banks stood undamaged amid the rubble of endless, flattened structures. Even hours later, as darkness fell, the city was filled with the sounds of moaning and screams for help. It was truly unbearable to hear, Jiang recalled. The journalist interviewed the wounded and relatives of the dead before rushing back to the office to write the story for that night's edition. The next day, May 4th, Jiang was in a local park talking to Fan Changjian, one of the era's star journalists at the prestigious newspaper Da Gongbao. They came across a woman weeping. She, her husband, and their children had been unable to reach a shelter, and when the bombers struck, they had been in the park. Her husband was killed outright, and her 2 children were wounded. "Why didn't the Japanese devils kill all of us?" she cried. "How are we going to live now?" In later years, one man remembered a story from that terrible day. The man's father had been talking to a group of young factory workers when the bombs fell. He heard a violent noise, and before his very eyes the workers were turned into bloody, fast-flying bits of flesh. This man's mother knew of an even worse tale. In the darkness of one of the larger shelters, people had stampeded in a desperate rush to avoid the raid. In the crush, many who tripped and fell were simply trampled to death. But the city had not escaped yet. That afternoon on May 4th, the sirens sounded once more. At 5:17 p.m., 27 Japanese aircraft appeared and began to bomb Chongqing again. "It was like being in a tiny boat, constantly shaking," recalled one survivor. Outside, bomb shrapnel was flying, window glass was shattering and falling to the floor, and there were the sounds of the enemy planes buzzing and machine guns firing. Terrified, but also curious, he looked out of the window and saw the whole sky was lit up by flames, and the surrounding buildings were collapsing one by one. Our beloved homes were being flattened and turned into a sea of fire. When the all-clear signal sounded just after 7 p.m., Zhang Shiluo's newspaper office was still standing, but the buildings all around had been destroyed. The May 4th bombing had used fewer planes than the previous day's raid, but the attackers' targets were wider and their aim even more deadly. On May 3rd, 673 deaths were recorded and 1,608 houses destroyed. On May 4th, 3,318 people were killed and 3,803 houses destroyed. These air raids brought international attention to the fate of Chongqing and the Chinese government in exile based there. At the same time that the Spanish Republic was in equally desperate combat against the nationalist forces of General Franco, diplomats, reporters, and businessmen from many countries were able to witness the devastation of the Chinese nationalist capital. Worse yet, the raids of May 3rd and 4th were just examples, albeit the most savage, of a continuous battering that Chongqing would endure for years. During the most intense period of bombing, between May 1938 and August 1941, there would be some 218 separate raids, using incendiary and fragmentation bombs, resulting in 11,885 deaths, mostly of civilians. The air raid signals became part of everyday life in the wartime capital. One man who spent his childhood in Chongqing recalled decades